this chapter, Religions of the Classical Era. Again, it's not in your broad text, but it is in the reading. It's the Egypt, Greece, and Babylon. In ancient Egypt, first of all, the idea is keeping the cosmos in harmony. And remember what he said? We talked about different, like pastoral, herders, small, if you're in kind of semi-arid, and then there was hunter-gatherers, and a lot of depend on your ecosystem. This is very important for Egypt, and you'll see the Nile was key. Ma'at overall, gave an overall sense of order, and in different eras had different systems. We even had a short time we'll get to with a short time of in fact, if you recall reading that, and it was on page 74 at Naughton, who was a monotheist, the first monotheist, so which is a brief period there from 1360 to 1344, and worship of Aton, the sun god. As a matter of fact, Nefertiti, they're a very famous couple, even though they tried to eliminate his countenance on all these murals and the like afterwards, because he was pretty heretical to the whole tradition, the whole sense of where the priesthood had been. There was that his wife is Nefertiti, and of course his son was probably the most famous pharaoh of all, even though he died at a young age because they found all his resources. That was Tutankhamun, King Tut. Unlike some of the African tribes, in the continental, in ancient Egypt, very strong afterlife concerns, very developed sense of a focus on the afterlife. After death, a person's soul survived. In addition, there was a body replicate. You called your Ka. It's that we have that the God's fashion, up there in the spirit, and then at death we reconnected with that this our Ka. So, and then the human spirit was the personal identity was the Aka, and the Aka was apart from the body after death. So, the replicate, so the Aka that we've had in this life leaves us after death, but we reunited with this Ka, this body replicate that was created when we were born. In Osiris, the god of the Nile is the god who is associated with the afterlife. So it kind of takes you on the barge in oil. There's an advancement in body preservation. A lot of cultures, there was the guy in Switzerland, was it that they found his mummified body? Happened by happenstance. There are some cultures that did practice mummification. The Egyptians took it to a whole new art, and that's why, in some ways, we know as much about them as we do. So, what was the role of the pharaoh? He's associated with the god Horus, and he interprets the moral order, or the Ma'at, that is part of the whole sense of order and rightness. If you study Eastern religion, it's almost like with the Tao, that kind of sense. There's a order that you kind of keep to. And so there's an obsession with death. That's what, part of the pyramids, the tombs. And what's key, not only the pyramids is placed to prepare you for the next life, that the river Nile permeates the spiritual vision of the Egyptians. The next one was the ancient Mesopotamia. And this is where the cradle of monotheism comes from. Remember, Akhenaten had just a brief period with monotheism. But these are where these are born, because it's out of here we'll meet our next lesson, Zoroastrianism. Even though you had different states' religions, the Babylonians and the Sumerians and the Assyrians came along, and later on the Persians, those empires would come and go. The religion remained stable. That was the stable connecting thread. And just as you probably see it, we talk about, Christianity and Islam, where there's political systems that come and go, but the religion remains stable and then very important. You see that there in Mesopotamia. It's where present day Iraq Gets a little bit to Iran, but some also in Syria, but Iraq is where the Tigris and the Euphrates are. So when this all begins, around 2300 BCE, before the Common Era, was Sargon of Akkad established the rule. Remember that in those days you had beginning about 10,000 years ago, you had the birth of agriculture. When the birth of agriculture, you got still stable, you have a sense of stability, you can stay put, you don't have to keep going after all the animals and following the herds all the time. You can grow your own food, and therefore you can start to get urban areas, and then you start to get hierarchies and state systems, political power. Again, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Hittites ruled at various times over that area. Okay, the Hittites were contemporary with the Egyptians. Again, the religion itself, though, remained an anchor. So a contrast between the religions of Mesopotamia and Egypt is that in Egypt, the River Nile provided regularity. Certain times of the year flooded, but it wasn't dramatic. There's a very ecological imprint on the life of the people. So therefore, kind of in that light, there was an emphasis on Ma'at, or order in life. And gods and the humans are in relative harmony. But for Mesopotamia, life and experience like floods and life, it wasn't as regular as the Nile. You have the great flood story. We'll get to Gilgamesh. Life is a lot more chaotic. Therefore, the cosmic state, you see, nature's a capricious ruler of the cosmos. And God and humans are often in conflict. It's not as nice and harmonious as Egypt. We're all singing out of the same hymn book. In Mesopotamia, it is chaotic, and you have to try to figure out what the gods want. The place of ritual. It's focused on the temple. There's a New Year festival, the Atkitu, where the story of creation was told and the temple was purified. And there was the 11 days where the order could be ritually restored and faith recommitted. Remember, things are kind of chaotic, and it's like the little boy with a finger in his like, you got to do what you can to make sure order continues. Remember, the Tigris, Euphrates, sometimes you had some spectacular floods. Unlike the regularity of the Nile, sometimes you had drought. Life was much more capricious for the Babylonians. One thing that was exciting was that in cuneiform, it was an early form of writing. It's inspiration for biblical writing. You have the first great law code, the Hammurabi Code, about the ethical life, what one should do and what shouldn't do, and it becomes an inspiration for a lot of documents in the ancient world, because a lot of the writing before were like economic transactions and stuff, but this was something a little bit different. About the afterlife. They addressed this theodicy, the question we'll keep coming back to. Why is there evil in the world? Each religion has to come to terms with that. So there was really a concept, again, it's very capricious in the afterlife, reward or punishment in the afterlife. The emphasis was maintaining justice in the here and now in society. Listed there are some of the Babylonian gods. An was the father of the gods and the one who retains order. Enlil is the god of the storm. Enki, or Ea, is the god of earth, waters, and wisdom. Ninursaga is the earth mother goddess. Nana is the moon god. Inanna, or Ishtar, is the goddess of warfare, but also love and fertility. And Marduk is the god of the city-state of Babylon. But over time, as the city-state becomes more powerful, Babylon, the Babylonian Empire, Marduk gets elevated to the top god status, not just the city-state, but kind of like overseeing all the gods. The Babylonian creation account is from Enuma Elish. Brings together the dragons of the waters who try to kill their offspring. And if you recall the reading, I took this on page 77 of the Ludwig, the chapter 4 of the Ludwig test. And it says, the great dragons, Tiamat, symbolizing the great salt waters, and Apsu, the sweet waters. And from this chaotic mingling arise the gods. They're young, active, and boisterous, somewhat similar to Greek, as we'll see in a few minutes. When Tiamat and Apsu try to kill their offspring, as the text says, the gods rally and defeat Apsu and contain him as the underground waters. They choose a young hero, Marduk. He was the god of Babylon as their champion, and Marduk enters in the battle with Tiamat and divides her into two. Thus, the cosmos becomes structured. Humans exist, therefore, to serve the whims of the gods. And that's why the priests are important. What do the gods want? And they're very capricious. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Actually, there's a statue of him. Gilgamesh really existed. He lived around 2500 BCE. So kind of when you still had like the end of the Sumerians time. There's a great flood that was sent to punish humans, and he has adventures with Enkidu, who is sentenced to death by the gods. The Epic of Gilgamesh, and one of the great stories of all time. It's basically starts out as a jerk, a bad king. He, there's some highlight. With these adventures, he finds Utnapishtim, who achieve immortal life by building an ark during a flood. He's seeing the impact when in the Babylonian exile, in terms of how the story of Noah comes about as well. We are definitely in Joseph Campbell territory. Here's another one reference to Genesis later on. He has a plan of immortality, but the snake steals it. So it's not the tree, knowledge of good and evil, but the snake steals his plan of immortality. But it goes to show the importance of the king in the city-state in the Babylonian culture. Which brings us to the last religion of the ancient Near East, ancient Greece. And this was the birth of Western mythology. In the creation myth, there's Mount Olympus. And Gaia sprang from chaos and birthed Uranus, the sky. Uranus in turn births the Titans. Remember, I think it was Cronus was a Titan. He's cruel. But Zeus, his sixth child, overthrew the Titans and becomes king of the gods. And even though in some ways we'd say Zeus might be a cat, Zeus was far more kind to humans than a lot of the other Greek gods. The relationship between gods and humans in ancient Greek religion was somewhat complex. Little like Babylon, although they were had more stories of moral good, a kind of a trajectory of justice, a little bit more in the Greek religions. There are four ages of the world in ancient Greek religion, and the reading from Ludwig points this out. Each were more subsequently fallen. This influence on Plato, Plato, the ideal, and we're going corrupt, and later on in Christianity with Augustine. The gods do take sides in human struggles. Case in point, Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. Or if you ever saw the movie, the very classic one, The Clash of the Titans, that they do get involved. Zeus particularly, because Zeus would come and disguise himself of affairs with earth women and all. He had tons of kids, and they were kind of partially God, partially human. Case in point, we'll say it's, Hercules. The great sin for the Greeks was hubris. And you find this in the myth of Prometheus. He could be equal to the gods, or Narcissus, the person who's in narcissism, which is a story of this man was a beautiful young man who this is the water, and falls in love with the image. There are 12 Olympians, and Zeus, and Hera, and Hermes, and Demeter, each with their roles and their stories. Heroes are offsprings of gods and humanity. Said Hercules, Perseus. You've got, it said that Zeus was very busy, and he gets around, and so he fosters these children who are half human, half divine, and they become the great heroes of the Greek mythology. Kind of how you can live in some qualities, like Hercules has almost like a Christ, I figure, super strong, takes on everything, and he finally gives his life for humans. And so the stories are given, their function is to explain why things are the way they are, and secondly, to inspire us and show us what is possible. And they're immortalized in constellations, of course. If you look at that, Cassiopeia, Pegasus, Hercules, Orion. You could go on to the zodiac. It's something there that even though they died, that because they were heroic, they shine in the stars now, and there's an outline of them in the night sky that calls that they still live. Two subsequent developments with ancient Greek religion. First, are the mysteries. You find this with the oracles, particularly with the Delphi oracles. There were secret rituals, and almost like, for one we've seen, like today we have lodges and, you know, a Masonic lodge or other kinds of lodges that are secret. The Illuminati, those kinds of things that they're inner knowledge, like almost later we see Christianity with Gnostic. And what it does is you're trying to figure out what the gods want, and you have this interconnection. It gave folk a leg up in getting the inside scoop with what the gods were thinking. By the way, the Delphic oracle, they found there's some steam that came out, not steam, but gas that came out fissures in the earth, and would put people in an altered state of consciousness. So it wasn't just some kind of nice storytelling. There were different kind of expressions. The Dionysus cult, you know, the Dionysian is like drink and the Bacchanal, like party hardy. And that was one approach. Versus Orphism, you know, Orpheus in the underworld that dealt with death and was very sober. But that was one development, the mystery cults that kind of came out latter part of Greek religion. But then you have the birth of philosophy. And what it is came of speculation and criticism of the entire system of gods. You begin with, I mean, here are a few, they're, you know, the pre-Socratics, but we'll just want to get for the big three here. Socrates, of course, was born in 470, lived to 399, who was charged with corrupting youth, but he's always challenged people to think. And, you know, why do you think that? Probably, you might say he's a pain, but he got you to think better and more critically, and not just, just what we see today in so much newscasting, just kind of people parodying one another. Plato, mentioned him a little bit earlier, but for Plato, reality consists of forms or ideas, that there's anything we see, observe, is just a reflection or shadow of something that's more pure. And almost like, you know, they say that the story, there was the famous painting at the School of Athens where Plato's pointing up and Aristotle's pointing down. Where Plato's more deductive, Aristotle's more inductive. He investigated classification system, the natural world, and to some degree he was a younger protege here of Plato. So really much with science, kind of a springboard of creativity, scholasticism in the Middle Ages when he's rediscovered. Of course, he taught Alexander the Great as a youth. Ancient Greece had many gods, a great many gods in its cosmology. At the same time, Greece was the seat of the birth of Western philosophy, which such seminal thinkers as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, coming from the one city-state of Athens. How might you account for this paradox? I don't know if you've thought about that. You've got all these gods that you might think of. Someone might say, well, that's so different than our experience of the world, but it's out of there. You have the birth of abstract thought. And remember, I said a couple weeks ago or a couple lessons back, David Abrams said that it was the Greek abstract thought that had positive and maybe negative, because we have a disconnect from creation or the realm, but also we could start to think like higher mathematics and language, like live more conceptually or abstractly. So it's kind of an interesting thing to consider.